Right, that's the kind of music we always hear when anything Native American, American Indian is being played. And not to say that isn't beautiful music because it's fabulously gorgeous, right? But again, this is one of those cultures that we just freeze in time. We think they're not relevant, they're not topical, they're nowhere to be found in current day society. And that's a big mistake. That mistake started a long time ago for American Indians. You remember when I was talking about rainbow fish and why I didn't like it because it really had to do with cultural assimilation. Remember the rainbow fish took plucked off all of its pretty scales and passed them around in order to fit in because it didn't need to have its own uniqueness. Well, that's what happened to American Indians back in 1790 all the way up to 1920. Good God-fearing white citizens of the United States decided to save the Indian by turning them into the dominant culture, right? That is their model. So, what they did is they literally took young children from their homes, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly, because Indians were on reservations and kind of in starvation mode by that time, and beat the American Indian out of them by forcing them to dress like the dominant culture, practice religion like the dominant culture, speak like the dominant culture, change everything about them. A really insanely huge thing when you think of it. Thousands and thousands and thousands of children went to boarding schools in order to beat the Indian out of them. And it was thought to be an okay thing. The benevolent white savior, right, was going to turn these beasts into civilized beings. The deal was that a lot of these schools ended up being enslavement camps, really, cheap labor in some really unideal situations to the point where many children died from various things, including beatings. So when you think about some of the current problems that some American Indians face in terms of diabetes, alcoholism, other things, some of the health factors, you wonder where that all came from, right? And you kind of got to think about the way we've treated American Indians from the get go. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. If you grew up in the United States, you might remember that Christopher Columbus is considered a hero, that he sailed from Spain to find gold, actually, and he landed somewhere in the Indies thinking he was in America, and that's where that name came from, which is really crazy when you think about it. And what happened was that he didn't find the gold that he wanted to find, but instead, Christopher Columbus found another way to make money, and that was to enslave Indians and to bring them back to Spain because that they were considered some currency, right? And he was considered to be a wretched, wretched individual. And that is not anything that I learned growing up in history. And we still have a holiday named after this guy, right? This guy who said the Indians are so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it. When you ask for something they have, they never say no. To the contrary, they offer to share with anyone. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. So pretty horrific, starting back in 1492, what we've done to American Indians, to Indians in general, right? So when we look at the term that we're supposed to use respectfully for American Indians, it's all over the place. Um, and Native Americans used to be the PC way to do it. And some people feel that that's just, again, another label that was put upon uh, the first peoples by actually people who haven't treated them very well. So I talked to actually a Canadian Indian about this issue because I really wanted to do things correctly and respectfully. And she's saying that really the go-to word for um, uh, Indigenous people in the United States would be American Indian. And that would be using it respectfully and properly capitalized, right? The deal is that what is really important to remember is that we should refer to American Indians specifically by their tribes. And I know this is a tough one in the United States, and it's kind of tough in California for sure. So, U.S. American Indian tribes, that's the biggest ones around. But look at all the tribes that we have in California. So, again, it's not anything we learn to do in our classrooms, right? But I mean, I remember I had to learn all the state's capitals. It seems like I could have learned the local tribes around my community. It shouldn't have been too difficult. So my children learned about the Miwok Indians. But again, it just seems overwhelming, right? But if we did things respectfully, it wouldn't be that overwhelming. And I'm sure it would be appreciated. Because what we have done to the culture of American Indians is really diminish who they are, objectify who they are. This is a perfect example. Disney again gets lambasted for some of the racist and sexist things that have done and that have occurred in the movies, and I'll have this up as a video to have you look at. So there was, this is interesting when we talk about stereotypes. Stereotypes started before even easy media was available. You know what I mean? It's easy to get stereotypes in books and movies and online all over the place, right? TV shows. But stereotypes for American Indians started way back. Look at 1883. And it's kind of interesting. So there's a Buffalo Bills Wild West show that went from town to town. Here's one of the posters and what it says under there, representing various tribes, characters, and peculiarities of the wily, dusky warriors and scenes from actual life, giving their weird war dances and picturesque style of horsemanship. So people would come from all around. It's like a show, right? The show was in town and see what was considered to be an American Indian. The problem with that is that the stereotypical American Indian is now a Lakota Indian with a full feathered headdress and everything that you see in this photo. And that's when if you think of an American Indian, that often pops up into mind. And this Wild Bill show it's actually perpetuated a stereotype because, again, with as many tribes as there are as many ways to conduct oneself within that tribe in terms of dress and costumes and dress and customs and everything else that goes along with that specific tribal culture. But we do have some overall American Indian stereotypes. And if you grew up here, you would, in the United States, you would recognize some of them. So the romantic version, the proud, quiet, aloof, manifest destiny, go west in wide open spaces, and here we are, right? That was one we know. Another stereotype, the savage that just scalping poor women left and right and scalping everybody, just scalping them left and right. All of these beasts do that, right? And then the vanishing race is like they're long gone. American Indians are long gone. They're not anywhere, right? Besides maybe, in the front of a cigar store. So they're just nowhere to be found. Vanishing race. Where are they? And then again, the living fossils, native cultures trapped in time. And that's what we see in children's books all the time. Just that when in our library, if we were able to do that right now, in our library, I'd have you go and pick about 5 books each, and you would see 1 million American Indian children's books, and they're all like this, living fossils. They all dress in their native garb, and they're nothing topical or current about them, right? So the deal is that these stereotypes have been infused into children's books, and they're still there. I mean, again, you could say to any kid almost, Where do American Indians live? Draw me a picture of an American Indian house, and what would we get? You know what we'd get, right? A teepee. So there's many books that are and have turned into movie stuff. Many books that are still used all over the place where we have Indians woo 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 woo, whooping it up and doing all this stuff. And these are the books that children are reading, and they're not really getting any of they're getting that single story, which is like cray cray. And then a lot of times, especially again in Disney movies, we portray American Indians, especially males, as just like silly little incompetent things to be laughed at, right? And the Little House on the Prairie, some of those books, and there's a lot of I like this. Too many texts continue to be filled with errors about American Indians because they neglect recent research. Hence, they perpetuate myths and channel our thinking away from the real people into stereotypes, sometimes silly, often harmful. And so that's it, right? The danger of that single story. And here's a good example of that is that there's a million books out there with American Indians in them and illustrated within the book. And they all have feathers in their hair. So if you really break this down, so there's many tribes that don't use feathers for anything. But whenever you think of an American Indian, you think of feathers, right? And the children's books continue to perpetuate that, and they're still out there available. Some of them are older, but they're still there, right? And still in the hands of kids, and still in the hands of teachers and parents telling those stories. And there's a lot of, again, if there's feathers within that tribe for whatever reason, quite often children do not wear feathers until they earn them way up the line, right? So it's again perpetuating a stereotype and a very sensitive subject matter, right? Your spirituality, however you want to phrase that, is an important thing and shouldn't be messed with. And again, just that whole idea of objectifying an entire culture, Big Chief, right? The Indian Sign Language and trading card game. And look at you get a colorful Indian headdress for each player to wear. So even as we look into updated and actually very acceptable in many classrooms of picture books, we see that we're not doing what we should do to carefully vet them, to really make them what they should be. And this is a perfect example. It's a beautiful book. It's beautiful. It talks about a story of this young American Indian who, not specified, we don't know what his tribe is. He just didn't want to be a warrior, so instead he was going to be, a dream painter. And the whole deal is that when you deconstruct this book, when authentic insider perspective is used, then you realize that it's just a pretty silly thing. It's reinforcing some stereotypes, and it's misleading the actual doings of certain American Indian tribes and mashing them all together and doing all sorts of stuff. So again, it's not considered a great book, right? And it says, let's see, little Gopher eventually begins to paint pictures of great hunts, of great deeds, of great dream visions, because that's what he's going to be, that everyone will remember. And the problem is that's now how it's done. If this was a Plains Indian tribe, then it's not how it's done. So even though it's beautiful and wonderful, it's not recommended. So again, a famous children's book writer and illustrator, beautiful stuff, doesn't have insider perspective. So should he be telling that story? And people within the culture would say no. Perfect example, another one. So the Susan Jeffers, this is a famous book that she's done. It's based on a famous speech of Chief Seattle in Brother Eagle, Sister Sky. So it's really well known, and this book is really popular. Brother Eagle, Sister Sky. So the deal is, she's a beautiful illustrator. The deal is, so on the cover of her book, once again, that American Indian stereotype, that's from Buffalo Bill and all that, it's a Plains native headdress, but the Chief Seattle wasn't Plains, wasn't Lakota. He's Duwamish, right up from where I am. That's what he was, and that's not what they wore. And then, again, the idea of the white boy saving the whole story, which that's another issue that I won't go into right now. So we have total misrepresentation of a very well-used book right there on the cover. And we've got other things going on also. Like, again, who should tell the story? I mean, her illustrations are fabulous. But here's the deal. They didn't use, I don't know what that noise was. They didn't use horses to get about there. And around the area I am now, the Duwamish, Salish tribes up here, they use canoes because there's waterways everywhere. Another misrepresentation. And the thing is, I haven't checked this year, really, to see what's going on in our local bookstore. But this was the picture I took last year. So here I am. We're 3 miles, seriously, less than 3 miles from Chief Seattle's grave. And in the only bookstore in the area on Bainbridge Island, it was still there last year. I, again, haven't checked. So who gets to tell the story? Who gets to misrepresent the story, more importantly? Susan Jeffers, beautiful illustrator. Insider Perspective, no. And I could just go on. Okay, this is Caldecott Award winner, Arrow to the Sun. This guy that was not utilizing an insider perspective won awards and lots of money for this book. And again, a deconstruction of it. So I have harsh words for the author of this book. That dance that happens at the end of the story, the dance of life, he made that up. No Pueblo does that. He made up that dance. For Pueblo Indians, dance is prayer. The not Pueblo Indian, Gerald McDermott, made up a prayer and is passing it off as a Pueblo prayer. I think that's pretty messed up. So again, the idea of insider perspective, especially for American Indians, because they've just been maligned all over the place, is a really important thing. And if we can't get an insider perspective, we want to make sure that we get some authentic perspective, because that's what we got to do. We got to make sure that we're not painting these pictures of tribes that don't even exist. And I'm telling you, even books, okay, so even this book, I think it's, well, maybe now it's about 5 years old. So Powwow's coming. Looks great because there's contemporary pictures inside. There's kids in jeans, but still we're assuming every tribe does powwows and they don't do it. So we still have lots and lots of current children's books that are portraying things inaccurately. So do we toss them out, right? Do we toss them out? I don't know. Unidentified American Indians in this book, when it's really important to be tribe specific, what do we do? It's again lumping things all together. I don't know. It's a big question. So things are improving better. Things are getting better. When we think about things getting better for American Indian children's books, we want specific. We would like to be tribe specific. We'd like to have insider perspective. We'd like to have authentic stories, meaning well-founded, not ones that are made up by white people, really. So again, name the tribes. See the tribes, name the tribes. And we're getting better with that. Name the tribes. Name the tribes. And then it works, right? Oh, wait a minute. Not this one. Savage Hunter. But I brought this up for a good reason. Because another thing that's really sad and horrific, we have objectified American Indians in just about any other culture. And don't we know the dominant culture knows how to objectify other cultures? Let's face it. We'll be talking about more of those examples as well. But this is, if you Google sexy Native American, then you're going to get tons and tons of pictures like this. Victoria's Secret years ago now did a whole runway show on this mishmash of different tribes stuff, right? On these really skinny models. And this is what the result of that was for some American Indians. Dear Victoria's Secret, did you know that if all of your 63 outfits have been worn by American Indian women, this is what would have happened. 21 of those women will have been raped at some point in their life, and 18 of those 21 rapes would have been perpetuated by non-native men. So thank you, Victoria's Secret, for blatantly and ignorantly perpetuating the over-sexualization of American Indian women to your predominantly non-native male audience. This is real stuff. It really is real stuff. So because we have objectified and over-sexualized American Indian women, 1 in 3 Native American women are victims of sexual assault. So our average is what, which is really just horrific to say, was maybe about 1 in 5, sometimes 1 in 6, 1 in 3 because of objectifying and sexualizing American Indian women. Messed up, right? I just came across this handbook and I just wanted to cry. Native American Women's Health Education Resource Center offers What Do You Do When You're Raped? An ABC handbook for Native girls. So, I mean, seriously, I wasn't looking for it. I was looking at some other stuff, came across it, free download, so you could get it. So you could have access to this if you're an American Indian young woman or girl. Ah, crazy, right? So crazy, so crazy. Objectification of a whole culture. Here's another whole onslaught of it here. So supposedly we were going to retire all mascot names for sports teams, right? American Indian mascot names. Talk about objectification in another realm. They oppress because they continue in the use of extreme negative stereotypical antics, words, and images. Antics like the tomahawk chop, mock Indian war chants, non-native painting their faces and dressing up like Indians, mascots performing mock Indian dances or throwing fiery spears, and it goes on and on and on. And this is what we're supposed to believe? Okay, so finally we can say, but wait a minute, they changed the Washington Redskins names, right? Yeah, it's now the Washington football players. But they only did it because UPS threatened to withdraw all funding for that team. That's the only reason why they did it. So this is being replaced with that. So I guess we're going to cheer that on. But what about all the rest, especially in high schools? What about all the rest using mascots? I think that's a Canadian hockey team. We couldn't get away with it with other races or ethnicities or cultures. And those are the nice names for the other cultures, right? Fill in the blank, because you know. So again, another objectification, perpetuating wretched stereotypes, and it's totally sanctioned. Totally sanctioned. So I like this. Native children cannot possibly look at a stadium full of thousands of people mocking their ethnicity and making fun of their traditions and feel good about being an Indian. The very real definition of racism. Again, honoring you. So I had used this for an example until February of this year, actually, right? So February of this year, they finally got rid of the American Indian, whoever that American Indian was, just, down on their knees, submitting to whatever, right? And they didn't even say why they did. Oh, they say they want to represent their farmers more accurately. They didn't even say, yeah, we've been using a racist, awful racist stereotype forever, and we are so sorry we finally wised up. Would help. So again, the question, how do you counter sexist and racist messages? You change the message. Change it. Because that, it's important, right? Ojibwa, 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 Ojibwe. Sorry, see, awful me. Cree, Hopi, Salish, Inuit. Change it. Change to tribe-specific, non-objectified, stereotypical children's books. Change the message. This is a little video that I'll be adding about the term redskin. It'll be on your videos. So your activity is going to be this, and I'll give you more implicit instructions regarding this activity. But what I'm going to ask you to do is find somewhere book that addresses one of these. Dead and Buried, Tourist Approach, Great American Indian Book. So again, the Dead and Buried was what we looked at. It's that they're all in their old regalia. They're not in contemporary clothes. They're like on horses and bare-chested, hunting buffalo. That's the children's book. And there's a lot of those out there. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have some of those, but there's so many, right? And then the tourist approach, let's only focus on their customs, their costs, their customs and their significant clothing and food and all of that. Let's just only look at it as kind of an exotic thing, right? Or a great American book that talks about contemporary things, that can touch on culture that's important, that's tribe specific. I want you to find one of those books. That's going to be your activity. And I know you can't go to a library, but you can kind of scope one out, and I'll tell you how. So, because a lot of times when we're talking about American Indians, when teachers are teaching it, they only go for that dead and buried approach. So kind of frozen in time, all in teepees, right? Or they go for the tourist approach because that's just so fascinating, right? We're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about crazy dances and crazy costumes, right? And we're going to just remove them all from our culture so that kids can't even identify with them. It's just more, again, like we're going somewhere and we're seeing something exotic. We're a tourist. They're not part of our culture. So again, these will be up there to remind you of how to do it. But that's the activity. And that's the end of this lecture. There's so much more to add to the American Indian tragedy when it comes to reflecting them accurately and respectfully in our culture. I mean, we're working on that for lots of ethnicities, right? And for lots of races, for lots of cultures right now. Not fast enough. Didn't happen soon enough. But we're taking a crack at it. And this is one area we really need to look in, because children's books, the problem, there's so many tribes, so many tribes, so much going on within those tribes because American Indians have been so oppressed. So COVID, look at the statistics there right now. So there's not as much or as many really fabulous American Indian children's books out there for a number of reasons. Now that would be a good paper. Okay, thanks for listening to this a little long, but so much to say. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.